Hello and welcome to this 15-minute video titled General Inclusive Education Knowledge. I'm happy and excited to present this very interesting subject. But first, a little background. In 2021, the government of Sierra Leone, through the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, developed a national policy on radical inclusion in schools. In the executive summary of the policy document, the Minister of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, Honorable Dr. David Moinina Senge, defined radical inclusion as the intentional inclusion of persons directly or indirectly excluded from education due to actions or inactions by individuals, society, or institutions. Sometimes silence and infrastructure added to other intentional actions exclude. Radical inclusion means that these silent exclusionary policies, moral stance, formally stated actions, institutional regulations, national laws, and systemic frameworks should be removed intentionally and with urgency to achieve inclusion. The goal of the national policy on radical inclusion in schools is to foreground, emphasize, and realize the constitutional rights of all children in Sierra Leone to equal access to quality preschool, basic, and secondary school education. In practice, this goal means actively enabling those from marginalized and excluded groups to enter and remain in school until completion, adapting the education system to better meet their learning needs, ensuring school is a place of dignity, safety, and respect for all, while systematically reducing cultural, policy, and practical barriers to education. Finally, it means developing the institutional structures, staff, and tools necessary to support radical inclusion. This video is one among numerous steps taken by government to actualize this policy on the national policy on radical inclusion. The policy targets historically marginalized groups, pregnant girls and parent learners, children with disabilities, children from rural and underserved areas, and children from low-income families. The policy is guided by MBSSE's 4 guiding principles: radical inclusion, comprehensive school safety, quality teaching and learning, and universal access. Radical inclusion. Development is only complete when everyone and anyone is given equal access to education. Comprehensive safety. For effective learning to take place, it needs to be empowered by a safe and enabling environment, including safe physical structure and psychologically safe learning environments. Quality teaching and learning. Learning is purposeful when all learners are provided with the ability to effectively learn and acquire skills, knowledge, and competencies that fulfill their potential. Universal access. Free quality education must be accessible to all learners. Barriers that are based on social class, gender, geographical location, pregnancy status, physical and mental disabilities, and other markers of difference must be removed and replaced by equal opportunity for all children. With this brief background, back to our topic. General inclusive education knowledge. What is inclusive education? It's a wide subject, so we'll just capture the essence of the principles and practices in this short video. Inclusive education is a process for increasing participation and reducing exclusion in a way that effectively responds to the diverse needs of all learners. It takes into account the individual teaching and learning needs of all marginalized and vulnerable children and young people. Another definition: inclusive education is a transformative process that ensures full participation and access to quality learning opportunities for all children, young people, and adults, respecting and valuing diversity and eliminating all forms of discrimination in and through education. There is no single definition of inclusive education, but all definitions have one key element in common: all categories of learners have the right to be included in the education process. Simply put, inclusive education is a system that ensures that all children, young people, and adults are allowed full participation and access to opportunities for quality education. All means all, everyone without exception. The individual teaching and learning needs of all marginalized and vulnerable children and young people must be met, especially children with disabilities. From these definitions, 4 main principles of inclusive education can be determined. 1. Increasing participation and reducing exclusion. 2. Responding to the diverse needs of all learners. 3. Making education the right for all children. And 4. Accepting differences. Consider these 2 scenarios as illustrations of what I've been saying so far. He feels marginalized and excluded. She misses out on her morning lesson and, like the boy, feels marginalized. The 2 scenarios give an indication of what happens to vulnerable and marginalized children in a non-inclusive education environment. The needs of such children are not met. Their challenges are not given consideration. What would have been the scenario in an inclusive environment? Ideally, a ramp should be provided for children like the boy in the wheelchair. But in the absence of such facilities, there are things the teachers and school authorities can do to mitigate the challenges faced by vulnerable and marginalized children in non-inclusive settings.
I've always told you to help your classmates in need so that they don't feel left out. Go and assist that boy.
For the girl who lives far away, a school bus would have been best for her. But where there is no such facility, the teachers and school authorities can help.
How are you? So if you have missed out again the morning lesson, go to your seat. Have this and wipe your face. I will see what I will do for you immediately after school.
An inclusive education system ensures that such challenges are minimized or eliminated because all children, young people, and adults have the right to be allowed full participation and access to opportunities for quality education. Schools can always reach out to the Free Quality School Education, FQSE regional district coordinators' offices, and any NGOs in their locality that may be interested in providing support with transport, subsidies, and building ramps and other resources that make school environments more accessible for children with special needs. To further explain, let's take a look at these 2 very simple diagrams illustrating a non-inclusive and an inclusive education system. The non-inclusive education system. The circle represents the education system. Only the regular children are inside the circle. All the others, children with disabilities, parent learners, pregnant school girls, children from poor backgrounds, children living far from school, are either outside or on the edge of the circle. They do not fit in. They belong to the category of marginalized and vulnerable, like the boy and the girl in the scenarios we've just seen. Now, to the inclusive education system. Again, the circle represents the education system. an all-inclusive system. All categories of learners are in the circle. The system doesn't discriminate. Another way to understand inclusion is to describe the existing systems with regards to how they treat or accommodate marginalized or vulnerable groups. There is segregation where you have a separate or segregated education setting that caters for learners with disability outside the mainstream education system. This tends to force people with disabilities to lead a separate life. There is integration, which accommodates learners with disabilities in the mainstream system, but makes no provisions for such learners to be with other learners. The learner is often taught in a separate classroom. The children has little or no contact with his or her peers with no disabilities or special needs. And there is inclusion, which takes care of all learners' educational needs, with or without disabilities.
So what are the barriers to inclusive education? There are many reasons for exclusion from education. Causes of exclusion or barriers to education can be found at two levels. Barriers to education which prevent children from coming to school. An example will be the case of the girl who lives far away from school. In extreme cases, such children will simply stop going to school. 2. Barriers within education which prevents children from participating in school. An example will be a child with partially impaired hearing having a hard time following the lesson being taught because the teacher is either unaware of the child's hearing challenges or is just not bothered about it, or has not been trained to manage a classroom with children with special needs. Such a child will naturally feel marginalized and deprived of learning. That child will not face such challenges in an inclusive education system, which ensures that such challenges are minimized or eliminated, because all children, young people, and adults have the right to be allowed full participation and access to opportunities for quality education. Approximately 80 to 90% of children with disabilities in Africa are currently out of school according to UN figures. While many of those enrolled are not learning, opportunities and provisions for children with disabilities are available in a few urban centers, while a greater percentage of children in rural areas are out of school or in mainstream schools where there is little or no provision at all. Removing barriers to accessing education and to learning for persons with disabilities are prerequisites for the realization of education for all. The right to education is universal and extends to all children, youth, and adults with disabilities. Well, that's about it for an introduction to inclusive education. There is a pamphlet accompanying this video which provides more explanations and illustrations about the principles and practices of inclusive education. This video, along with the pamphlet, serves as an introductory lesson and a quick reference guide to understanding inclusive education for teachers, school leads, and administrators on how to promote an inclusive education environment in Sierra Leone. Thank you for watching.